"You're not even her real granddaughter," my supposed father growled, his expression twisted with bitterness. "Only those with true blood ties deserve any part of this family's legacy." I stood paralyzed in the center of my late grandmother's private library. The room, filled with old books and mahogany shelves, felt like it was closing in around me. Just 3 days had passed since her funeral, and already the family's unity was fracturing under the weight of greed. "What are you saying?" I asked, barely able to find my voice. My heart was pounding so loudly I could barely hear myself. "Don't act clueless, Natalie," he sneered. "Your mother's little secret isn't so little anymore." He was pacing now, back and forth over the intricate Persian rug. His eyes flicked up to the regal portrait of Grandma Adeline above the fireplace, the woman who'd ruled this family with both elegance and iron will. Adeline cared about bloodlines more than anything. Once the lawyer confirms you don't have Fitzgerald blood, you're out. No inheritance, no share, nothing. I looked him straight in the eye, my voice trembling but firm. "And if I do have the bloodline, if I am related by blood, do you stand by your word?" "Absolutely," he said, raising his chin in that familiar arrogant tilt. "This legacy stays with real Fitzgeralds, not imposters." Before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below, letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We're excited to connect with all of you, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more amazing content. Now back to the story. My name is Natalie Fitzgerald, or so I thought. I'm 27 years old, and 5 minutes ago I still believed Leonard Fitzgerald was my biological father. Now, standing in Grandma Adeline's Georgian estate just outside Baltimore, I was beginning to question everything. All I had ever wanted was fairness, what my grandmother intended for me. She had specifically mentioned me, her only granddaughter, during our last conversation about her estate. She made it clear I was meant to be included. But now Leonard, the man I'd spent my life trying and failing to impress, was standing in my way. The man who had only ever offered me the coldest form of affection was now trying to erase me completely. "You can come to the will reading if you must," he added casually, brushing me off. "But don't expect anything. Harrison and I are already looking into contesting any clauses that name you." Harrison Cole, Leonard's friend and our family attorney, had always made my skin crawl, but now I felt a deeper dread settle over me. The two of them, working together, had power. "I'll be there," I said softly. "Grandma wanted me there." "Sentimental," Leonard scoffed. "She was always too soft on you, but the law doesn't care about feelings." As he left the room, I collapsed into Grandma Adeline's old writing chair. My phone buzzed. "Mom, we need to talk tonight. Just us." And with that text, the ground beneath my feet began to shift. My memories of Uncle Malcolm were few, but always filled with warmth. He had this quiet way about him, never loud, never demanding, but when he smiled, it lit up a room. He gave thoughtful gifts, always remembered the small things, and, unlike others in the family, he listened. Truly listened. Like my thoughts mattered. It was the complete opposite of how things had always been with Leonard. Leonard Fitzgerald measured people by their resume, degrees, income, achievements. Value, in his world, was something you could quantify. My brothers, Caleb and Mason, had always fit the mold. Caleb stepped into the family business straight after college, and Mason breezed through law school with honors. They were Leonard's pride. His legacy. I, on the other hand, had never quite been what he wanted. "She lacks that Fitzgerald grit," I overheard him mutter to my mom once, when he thought I wasn't around. "Too delicate. Too unsure of herself." It didn't matter that I'd graduated summa cum laude, or that I'd built a career I loved restoring historical architecture. He never saw it as good enough. I had always assumed it was a combination of his perfectionism and maybe a bit of sexism. I never imagined the distance between us had deeper roots. Grandma Adeline had been my anchor. She supported my love for art and history, encouraged me to pursue what made me feel alive, not just what advanced the family name. Every Sunday while I was in college, I'd visit her mansion for tea. We'd talk about everything: our family's complicated past, her early life as a woman fighting for a voice and a patriarchal legacy. She saw something in me, something Leonard never had. "A Fitzgerald carves their own future," she told me once, pouring tea with shaking hands. "Don't ever let a man tell you otherwise." Her passing had left a hollow ache. Her voice, her guidance, it was gone. And now, without her protection, I felt exposed. After the funeral, I began to notice things. Leonard grew colder, sharper in the way he looked at me. I'd walk into a room and conversation would stop. Harrison Cole was suddenly everywhere, whispering in corners. I told myself I was overthinking things, that everyone was grieving in their own way. But now I knew better. The last time I saw Grandma alive, she pulled me in close and whispered, "Trust your instincts, Nat. Not everything is what it seems." I hadn't understood it then. I do now. As I drove through the city toward my mother's favorite cafe, a tucked-away place she loved because no one knew us there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something big, something buried for decades, was about to come to light. When I saw her waiting for me, I hardly recognized her. Her makeup was smudged, her hair undone, her eyes tired and sad. She didn't even wait for the drinks. "He had no right to tell you like that," she said. "It wasn't his truth to weaponize." "So it's true?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Leonard isn't my real father?" My mother nodded slowly, pain flickering across her face. "It's not as simple as he made it sound, Natalie. He's twisting it. There's more to it." And there was. Over the next hour, she unraveled a story that made my whole world feel upside down. Before she married Leonard, she had been in love with Malcolm. Yes, Uncle Malcolm. They had been serious, even made plans for a future together. But then Malcolm was offered a once-in-a-lifetime research position in Oregon, working on cutting-edge medical science. They decided he should take it. They thought their relationship could survive the distance. But it didn't. I was young, lonely, confused, she confessed, her voice trembling. Leonard had always been around. He was stable, persistent. He saw an opportunity, and I didn't realize what I was giving up. A brief relationship with Leonard followed, a rebound, really. But before long, she ended it, realizing she still loved Malcolm. By the time she found out she was pregnant, Malcolm had already moved on. He was engaged. "I knew the child was his," she said. The timing made that clear. But Leonard insisted the baby, you, was his. And when I told him, he proposed. I didn't know what else to do. She needed stability. Leonard wanted a family. Wanted the appearance of a family. With the Fitzgerald wealth tied up in strict legal terms favoring heirs of blood in marriage, Leonard needed to appear like a perfect successor. He wanted a wife, a child, a future that looked clean on paper, she said bitterly. And I just wanted to do what was best for you. Time passed. The truth remained hidden. Malcolm eventually returned to the East Coast with his now divorced wife, but kept his distance from the family. He had no children of his own. He threw himself into medical research and rarely attended family gatherings. "Did he ever know?" I asked, barely breathing. My mother shook her head, her voice barely audible. "I never told him. I couldn't. By then, it felt too late. My heart was a whirlwind of questions and emotion. I wasn't sure what was more painful. That Leonard had never been my real father, or that the one man who might have been, Malcolm, had been kept in the dark all these years. But one thing was clear. Leonard hadn't revealed the truth because he cared about justice. He had done it to cut me out of the will, to sever my claim. Only now, that plan might just unravel everything. Because if I was truly Malcolm's daughter, then I wasn't just still part of the Fitzgerald line. I might be the only blood granddaughter Adeline had. The next morning, I drove across town to Malcolm's apartment. My heart was a hammer in my chest, each beat loud enough to drown my thoughts. I had called him the night before, keeping the details vague, just that there were family matters we needed to discuss before the will reading. Now I sat in his sunlit living room, surrounded by medical journals, coffee mugs, and travel souvenirs. It smelled like old books and cinnamon tea. "You seem uneasy, Natalie," he said kindly, handing me a cup. At 58, Malcolm had the same steady gaze and quiet charm he always had, more mentor than uncle. His dark eyes reminded me of someone, me. I took a deep breath. "I have to ask you something, and I need you to be honest." "Of course. Did you and my mom, were you together before she married Leonard?" He blinked, slowly. The warmth drained from his face and was replaced with a careful neutrality. "Why are you asking me that now?" I swallowed hard. "Because Leonard told me I'm not his daughter. He's using it to try to get me removed from Grandma Adeline's will." He stared at me, stunned, then slowly set his tea down. That sounds like Leonard, calculated, even in cruelty. He leaned back, looking at me with a focus that felt piercing. What did your mother tell you? I shared everything, how they'd loved each other, the pregnancy, the timing. He listened intently, and when I was finished, he nodded slowly, like something had finally clicked. She never told me, he said, voice thick with emotion. I never knew she was pregnant. By the time I returned, she and Leonard were married, and it was over. He looked at me again, longer this time. You believe I might be your biological father? Yes, and Leonard's trying to prove I don't belong to the Fitzgerald line. But if I am your daughter, then I do. Maybe even more so. Malcolm's expression changed, his gaze softened. We need to be certain. A DNA test would make this clear. I nodded, relieved. You'd be willing? In a heartbeat. Honestly, Natalie, I've always felt a strange bond with you. Something I couldn't explain. If it turns out I'm your father. He trailed off, blinking hard. Let's find out. We arranged for same-day testing through a private lab, results promised within 72 hours, just in time for the rescheduled will reading. While we waited, I contacted Grandma Adeline's personal attorney, Mr. Bowman, hoping for clarity, but he remained tight-lipped. I can't discuss specific terms before the reading, he said. But I can assure you, your grandmother made her wishes very clear. I pressed him. Did she know the truth? His face flickered, barely perceptible. All I'll say is this. Adeline Fitzgerald noticed everything. That told me more than enough. 2 days before the rescheduled will reading, the results arrived. My hands shook as I opened the encrypted email. Pages of genetic markers and percentages blurred in front of my eyes, until I found the line that changed everything. Probability of paternity, 99.99998%. Malcolm Fitzgerald was my biological father. I stared at the screen, breath caught somewhere in my throat. It was all true. Leonard had never been my father, not in name, not in blood. Grief for what never was mixed with fury at the decades of deception. But beneath it all, I felt something else too. Clarity. I called Malcolm immediately. His voice was quiet on the other end, but I could hear the emotion. I suspected, he said. I didn't want to believe Leonard would go this far, but I always felt a connection. You have your mother's voice, but those eyes, they're Fitzgerald eyes, from my side. We agreed to meet before the reading. We had decisions to make. But that night, I received an unexpected invitation. An urgent meeting request from Harrison Cole. Against my instincts, I agreed. Something told me I needed to hear what he had to say. His office was sterile and grand, all glass and marble and soft jazz. Harrison greeted me with a plastic smile, gesturing for me to sit. I wanted to speak with you directly, he began, before the will reading becomes unnecessarily messy. I folded my arms. You mean before your client's scheme backfires? He ignored that. Leonard was very distressed to learn of the paternity test you and Malcolm conducted. He's asked me to offer a resolution. He slid a document toward me, a waiver. It stated that in exchange for a one-time payment of $250,000, I would relinquish all claims to Adeline Fitzgerald's estate. I laughed. Actually laughed. This is insulting, I said, pushing it back. My grandmother named me in her will. She knew exactly who I was. Under the assumption you were Leonard's daughter, Harrison corrected. No, she knew. And now we have DNA evidence proving I'm Malcolm's daughter, which makes me Adeline's blood granddaughter. There are layers to this you don't understand, he warned. The Fitzgerald Trust doesn't just care about biology. It cares about legal inheritance. Leonard is prepared to be unkind. I stood. Then he'll find out I'm prepared too. But the next morning, Malcolm called again, his voice full of shock. Natalie, he said, you need to hear this. I got a call from an old friend, a retired nurse who used to work for my parents. She told me something I never knew. Leonard, he was adopted. I froze. What? She said our parents had trouble conceiving. They adopted Leonard, kept it secret. I'm their only biological child. My stomach dropped. So by Leonard's own logic, he's not a Fitzgerald by blood. Exactly. It hit me like a tidal wave. Leonard wasn't even a Fitzgerald by blood. After all his lectures about lineage, all his sneering accusations that I didn't belong, he had built his entire identity on a lie. A lie even he didn't know. Does Leonard know? I asked Malcolm quietly, still trying to process it. I don't think so, he said. Our parents never told him, but Mom was close with Adeline, she might have known. I sat down, overwhelmed. That would explain why she was always so protective of me. Malcolm nodded. And why she was so specific in her estate planning. I've been reviewing the original Fitzgerald trust documents. There's a clause, clear as day. Only direct descendants by blood from Harold Fitzgerald, her father, are eligible for the trust. So, Leonard's attempt to use that clause to disqualify me could backfire. Badly. Exactly, he said. By insisting on a bloodline standard, he may have disqualified himself entirely. The morning of the will reading, the Fitzgerald estate looked regal beneath the crisp autumn sky. The entire family had gathered in the formal dining room. Tension buzzed through the air like static. I sat with Malcolm beside me. Across from us sat Leonard, flanked by Caleb and Mason. Harrison, for once, looked uneasy. We must first address a pressing issue, Harrison began. Eligibility for trust beneficiaries. Leonard leaned forward smugly. It's come to our attention that Natalie may not be my biological daughter and therefore may not be entitled. I have DNA evidence, I interrupted, sliding the lab report across the table. Malcolm is my biological father. Gasps filled the room. Leonard's face contorted with rage. This proves nothing. It proves everything, Malcolm said firmly, because by the same logic, you're not a Fitzgerald either. Leonard paled. I have the adoption records, Malcolm continued. You were adopted as an infant. Adeline knew, and she planned for this. Just then, Mr. Bowman, Grandma Adeline's personal attorney, entered with a sealed letter. Mrs. Fitzgerald left instructions, he said, in case this exact issue arose. He opened the envelope and read aloud. If you are reading this, then the truth has surfaced at last. I always knew Leonard was not born of Fitzgerald blood, but I loved him all the same. However, his obsession with legacy and his treatment of Natalie have shown me who he truly is. Malcolm is my son. Natalie is his daughter. They are my blood. The trust, as written, belongs to them. The silence that followed was deafening. Leonard stood, seething, but he had nothing left. Nothing to fight with. He stormed out, muttering threats that fell on deaf ears. My brothers stayed behind, their faces unreadable. You're still our sister, Mason said eventually. That's not changing. And just like that, the storm passed. Later that evening, Malcolm and I sat in Grandma's study, the same one where this all began. We didn't talk much, we didn't need to. We were family now. And finally, that meant something real.